In a dilapidated building strewn with wires and flickering neon lights, the unmistakable hum of machinery ate away at the silence. Emil, a gaunt figure with sallow cheeks, sat before an ancient computer terminal, wires snaking into the base of his skull. The interface to the virtual reality simulation chamber was archaic, a relic kept alive by his own skill set and stubbornness. "Are you certain you can perfect the construct, Emil?" Ingvar's voice was thick with skepticism, infused with the aromatic smoke billowing from his cigar. "Perfect is a fantasy, Ingvar," Emil reminded, his fingers dancing across the grimy keyboard with practiced ease. "But I can shove us further into the realm of function. We can erase the glitches, push the boundaries of believability." Ingvar, more muscle than man, shrugged into his leather jacket. "Just remember, gritty is good, Emil. Too real we lose ourselves. Too fake we lose the immersion. The line's thin." "I remember," he murmured, the screen light casting eerie shadows on his face. "Glad to hear it, Emil." Ingvar extinguished his cigar, the red ember winking out of existence. "So lead us not into perfection, but deliver us from glitches." Emil nodded, his gaze fixated on the terminal screen. He typed a few more commands, and the simulation chamber whirred to life. The metallic walls of the chamber shuddered as their surroundings changed. Ingvar stepped into the chamber, and Emil followed suit. They found themselves in a busy city street, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement. Emil marveled at how much smoother everything looked now that he had tweaked the program. But then something caught his eye. A figure lurking in the shadows, watching them with glowing eyes. Emil tensed up, but Ingvar didn't seem to notice. "Let's try out some combat simulations," Ingvar suggested. Emil tried to shake off the unease that had settled on him like a heavy cloak. He knew he had to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the figure with glowing eyes. Had it been part of the simulation or something else entirely? "Emil, you with me?" Ingvar's voice broke through his thoughts. "Yes, sorry," Emil said quickly. "What kind of combat simulations did you have in mind?" Ingvar grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Let's start easy hand-to-hand combat." The virtual world shimmered and shifted once more as they moved into an arena filled with sand and scattered rocks. Emil could feel the heat radiating off the ground as he squared up against Ingvar. They circled each other for a few moments before Ingvar lunged forward, fist flying towards Emil's face. Emil ducked and weaved, barely avoiding the blow. "You're getting slow in your old age," Ingvar taunted. Emil gritted his teeth and launched himself at Ingvar in return, fists pounding into flesh with satisfying thuds. For a moment, they were two warriors locked in mortal combat rather than two men in a dingy basement surrounded by wires and machinery. But then something changed. Emil wasn't sure what it was until he felt it deep within him. A strange energy pulsed through his body, making him feel stronger and faster than ever before. "What did you do?" he gasped out between punches. Ingvar paused mid-strike, his brow furrowing as he looked at Emil. "I didn't do anything," he said, but there was an edge to his voice, a hint of suspicion. "You okay?" Emil could feel it coursing through him now, like static electricity but more alive, more intentional. His muscles tensed and relaxed with an unnatural rhythm, and his vision sharpened. Everything in the virtual simulation seemed to slow down, but not in the way it usually did when Emil tweaked the system. This was different. He could feel the code, the strings of numbers and commands, weaving through the air around him like a living organism. "I don't know what this is," Emil muttered, wiping the sweat from his forehead as the heat of the simulation intensified. "But it's not part of the program I wrote." Ingvar stepped back, giving Emil a wary glance. "Pull us out, Emil. Now." Emil's fingers twitched, eager to comply, but the moment he reached for the interface controls, a jolt shot up his spine. The wires connected to the base of his skull pulsed, tightening their grip. His hand froze before it could reach the console. "I can't. Something's wrong." The arena began to blur around them, pixelated at the edges like a decaying image on an old screen. The glowing eyes Emil had spotted earlier reappeared in the shadowed corners of the simulation, multiplying, watching. They were no longer subtle, no longer hidden. Emil could feel them now, burning through him with a sentient intensity that made his skin crawl. Ingvar's eyes darted around the arena, his usual bravado slipping as tension crept into his voice. "What the hell did you let in, Emil?" "I didn't," Emil began, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel something vast, something ancient pressing against his mind. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a bug in the code. It was aware. The simulation rippled again, but this time, instead of the smooth transitions Emil had built into the program, jagged shapes formed around them. The ground beneath their feet cracked and split, revealing dark voids that stretched into infinity. The air grew thick, almost tangible, like a dense fog of digital interference, making it hard to breathe. "I think we've been breached," Emil managed to say through gritted teeth. Ingvar's fists clenched, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the shifting environment. "Breach? By what? Hackers?" "No," Emil whispered, eyes wide as the glowing figures in the shadows grew larger, their outlines becoming more defined. "This is something else." One of the figures stepped forward, emerging fully into the flickering light of the simulation. It was tall, unnervingly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch impossibly long. Its skin was translucent, revealing a network of glowing veins underneath, pulsing with the same strange energy Emil had felt in his own body moments earlier. Its eyes, those glowing, burning orbs, locked onto Emil. "You shouldn't have connected," the figure said, its voice a distorted echo that reverberated through the arena. "You have opened the gateway." Emil stumbled back, his legs weak. "Gateway to what?" The figure didn't answer, but behind it, the other shadowy forms began to move, slithering out of the darkness like living nightmares. Emil's heart pounded in his chest as they surrounded him and Ingvar, their glowing eyes unblinking, their movements fluid yet disjointed, like corrupted files barely holding together. Ingvar, ever the soldier, squared up, fists raised, ready to fight. "Whatever this is," he growled, "we'll punch our way through it." But Emil knew better. There was no fighting this. This wasn't just a malfunction in the code, or an external breach by some rogue hacker. Something far worse had found its way into the simulation. Something not born of binary or algorithms, but of a deeper, darker source. "You don't understand," Emil muttered, his breath ragged. "They're inside the system. And inside us." Ingvar's face darkened as realization set in. "Inside us." The tall figure moved closer, its eerie voice dripping with cold, mechanical malice. "You were never in control. The moment you connected, you became part of us." Emil's mind raced. This was beyond anything he had ever encountered, something that defied logic. His hands itched to disconnect, to pull the plug and escape, but every attempt to command the system failed. It was as if the simulation had become sentient, and it wasn't letting them go. "You need to fight it," Emil whispered to himself as much as to Ingvar. "We can't let it take over." But how could they fight something they didn't even understand? The shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder, more insistent, seeping into Emil's thoughts. They weren't just external threats. They were probing, infiltrating his mind, wrapping around his consciousness like chains. He could feel his sense of reality slipping, the line between the virtual and the real blurring. "Emil!" Ingvar's voice cut through the haze, pulling him back for a brief moment. "You have to break us out. Now." "I'm trying," Emil shouted, his fingers spasming as he fought against the restraints in his own body. But the energy surging through him was stronger, too strong. It was no longer just the simulation at stake. Whatever had invaded the system was taking over their minds. The figures stepped closer, their eyes burning into Emil's soul. "You will not escape," they intoned, their voices harmonizing into a chilling chorus. "You are part of the new construct now." Emil's heart sank. He had always been able to control the simulations, to manipulate the digital landscape with ease. But now, for the first time, he realized he wasn't the architect. He was a prisoner, and something far worse was pulling the strings. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of alien thoughts drowning out Emil's sense of self. He felt his consciousness dissolving into the vast network of code that these shadowy figures controlled. His body, still tethered to the simulation through wires, became nothing more than a vessel for their presence. He could see Ingvar still fighting, throwing punches at the approaching figures, but it was futile. Ingvar's movements grew sluggish, as if the simulation itself was draining his will to resist. Then, as Emil felt himself slipping into the void, a single thought pierced through the noise. An anomaly in the data, a code pattern that didn't belong to the invaders. It was something he had written years ago, a safeguard buried deep within the system in case anything ever went wrong. Emil focused all his energy on that pattern, pulling it to the forefront of his mind. He couldn't control the simulation anymore, but if he could trigger the safeguard, it might just give them a way out. The shadows recoiled as Emil's mind latched onto the safeguard, their glowing eyes flickering in disarray. "What is this?" they hissed, their voices losing their harmony. The figures shifted, their forms growing unstable, glitching in and out of focus as Emil activated the code. The simulation buckled, the neon city and the arena flickering between states of existence. Emil could feel the energy that had once bound him weakening, like chains snapping one by one. With a final surge of effort, Emil triggered the failsafe. The entire simulation erupted in a blinding flash of light. The shadowy figures let out distorted, garbled screams as they were torn apart, their digital forms unraveling into nothingness. The arena vanished, and for a brief moment, there was only darkness. Emil gasped as he awoke, back in the dilapidated building. The wires were still connected to his skull, but the screen before him was dead. The simulation shut down. He turned his head slowly, feeling a deep ache in his muscles. Ingvar was beside him, breathing heavily but conscious. "You did it," Ingvar rasped, eyes wide with disbelief. But as Emil looked around, something was wrong. The room seemed off, the colors too vivid, the shadows too deep. He looked down at his hands and realized with a sinking feeling that they were pixelated, subtly glitching at the edges. The invaders were gone, but so was the real world. They were still in the simulation. Only now, Emil was the architect of his own prison. But tell me, did you like this story? Would you change anything? Would you like a sequel? Leave it in the comments, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and leave your like. And for more stories like this, click on the video that appears on the screen.